Hello, this is Clyde, and a quiet welcome back to the Dusty Codex. We often tell stories of spectacular failures like the Vasa, which sank in minutes and became a time capsule. But what if a voyage was a spectacular success, a triumph of science and navigation? And that success was the very thing that destroyed its captain. We are always curious to know where our stories are traveling to and where your corner of the world is. Please, take a moment to let us know in the comments where you are watching from today. In 1789, as the Bastille was being stormed in Paris, the Spanish Empire launched its most ambitious scientific expedition in history. Its goal, to rival the voyages of Captain Cook and map the entire Spanish Empire from Patagonia to the Philippines. The voyage, led by the brilliant Italian-born Commodore Alessandro Malaspina, was a 5-year unqualified success. His 2 corvettes, the Descubierta, Discovery, and Atrevida, Daring, charted coastlines, discovered new species, and studied global cultures with a humane, enlightened eye. When Malaspina returned to Spain in 1794, he was celebrated as a national hero, the Spanish Cook. A year later, he was arrested on charges of high treason, stripped of his rank, and thrown in a remote prison. His life's work, a 9-volume report that could have changed the Spanish Empire, was declared a state secret, locked away, and deliberately hidden from the world for over 100 years. This is the mad voyage of Alessandro Malaspina, the story of a genius who was silenced for being right. The expedition was born in a brief, hopeful moment. Spain, under King Charles III, was in the grip of the Enlightenment. The king wanted to prove that Spain was a modern, scientific nation, not a backward, superstitious empire. He wanted his own Captain Cook. He found his man in Alessandro Malaspina. Malaspina was not a typical conquistador. He was an intellectual, a student of Rousseau and Newton. He believed the expedition's purpose was not to conquer, but to understand. The 2 ships were state-of-the-art, packed with the best scientific instruments of the day, chronometers for measuring longitude, telescopes, and laboratories. Malaspina assembled a dream team of botanists, artists, and hydrographers. On July 30th, 1789, the expedition set sail from Cadiz. Just 16 days earlier, the Bastille had fallen in Paris. As Malaspina sailed out in a wave of Enlightenment optimism, a dark, reactionary shadow was already beginning to fall over Europe. For 5 years, the expedition was a model of scientific success. They first sailed down the coast of South America, meticulously mapping the shores of Patagonia, Chile, and Peru. The scientists, like the brilliant botanist Thaddeus Haenke, amassed an enormous collection. They gathered thousands of new plant species, minerals, and animal specimens, creating a priceless record of the continent. Unlike previous voyages, Malaspina's artists were ordered to paint with ethnographic accuracy. They created a sensitive, humane, and invaluable record of the indigenous cultures they met, from the peoples of Tierra del Fuego to the Tlingit in Alaska. In 1791, following a royal command, Malaspina sailed north to Alaska, searching for the fabled Northwest Passage. He proved, with meticulous scientific rigor, that the passage did not exist there, correcting the maps of the world. They crossed the Pacific to the Spanish colonies of Guam and the Philippines. Here, Malaspina's journey changed. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a political observer. He saw firsthand the corruption and inefficiency of the Spanish colonial system. He began to write not just about coastlines, but about politics. He started to draft a political report, a secret document outlining how Spain could reform its empire, moving from brute force to a more enlightened, Commonwealth-style system. After a final stop in New Zealand and the young British colony in Sydney, Australia, the expedition turned for home, its holds overflowing with specimens, charts, and Malaspina's increasingly dangerous political ideas. Malaspina's voyage was a triumph of the Enlightenment, a testament to science, reason, and humanistic observation. But that was the problem. The Spain he returned to was a fearful, paranoid state where such ideas were seen as a mortal threat. His true discovery wasn't a coastline or a new plant. It was the inevitable truth that his vast empire was rotting from the inside. This is the great, recurring tragedy of history, when men of action and vision are silenced by men of fear and status. It forces us to ask, how many other magnificent human achievements are lying buried in dusty archives, lost because their truth was simply too inconvenient for those in power? If these stories, where courage meets court intrigue and genius falls victim to fear, are what you seek, I invite you to subscribe to the Dusty Codex. Your support allows us to continue unearthing these profound chapters of our shared past before they fade into the silence of political history. When Alessandro Malaspina returned to Cadiz in September 1794, his 5-year voyage was a staggering success. He had not lost a single ship. He had created the most detailed maps in the world. He was, for a moment, the most celebrated man in Spain. But the Spain he returned to was not the one he had left. The enlightened King Charles III was dead. In his place sat Charles IV, a weak, dim-witted and deeply paranoid ruler who was terrified of the godless French Revolution. The real power in Spain was the Prime Minister, Manuel Godoy. A former royal guardsman, Godoy had risen to power by becoming the lover of the Queen, Maria Luisa. He was corrupt, vain, and held absolute, unchecked power. Into this new, dark, and reactionary Spain sailed Alessandro Malaspina. He was an Enlightenment man, a believer in science, reason, and reform. Godoy, the Prince of Peace, saw him as a threat. He was popular, he was brilliant, and his ideas sounded dangerously French. Malaspina, naive to the new political climate, began to prepare his 9-volume report for publication. But he also included his secret political report, which openly criticized the colonial system and, by extension, Godoy's corrupt management. He advocated for a radical idea that Spain should transform its empire into a commonwealth of nations, bound by trade and mutual respect, not force. To Godoy and the king, this was not just reform, it was treason. It was the madness of the revolution. Frustrated that his work was being ignored and his rival, Godoy, was ruining the country, Malaspina made a fatal mistake. He became involved in a clumsy, naive political plot to have Godoy removed from power and the Queen reformed. Godoy pounced. On November 23, 1795, Alessandro Malaspina was arrested in Madrid. The mad voyage was over. His plot was framed as a Jacobin conspiracy against the king himself. The trial was a political show. Malaspina was found guilty of high treason. The man who should have been Spain's greatest hero was sentenced to 10 years in prison, stripped of his rank, and his name was to be erased from the records. He was sent to the remote, wind-swept Castillo de San Anton, a grim fortress in northern Spain. He spent 7 years in a cold, damp cell, staring at the Atlantic Ocean he had once conquered. And his life's work? The 9-volume report, the 88,000 botanical specimens, the thousands of pages of charts, maps, and drawings. They were all declared state property, classified, and buried in the naval archives. The Spanish government systematically suppressed the expedition. They even allowed other foreign explorers, like Alexander von Humboldt, to access parts of Malaspina's data, which they then published under their own names, further obscuring Malaspina's achievement. Malaspina was eventually released in 1802, thanks to pressure from Napoleon. but only on the condition that he be exiled from Spain forever. He returned to his native Italy, a broken, forgotten man, and died in obscurity in 1810. For almost 100 years, the greatest scientific voyage in Spanish history remained a state secret. The mad explorer was a bogeyman, a footnote in a tale of treason. Then, in 1885, a new generation of Spanish scholars and naval officers looking to reclaim their history finally unearthed the full manuscript. They published it for the first time nearly a century after it was written. The world was stunned. The report was a masterpiece of Enlightenment science and thought. Malaspina wasn't a madman. He was a visionary, a man who had proposed a peaceful, scientific, and multicultural future for the Spanish Empire. He wasn't just the Spanish cook. In many ways, his expedition was more comprehensive, his scientific team larger, and his political and social observations more humane and insightful than his famous British rival. Today, Alessandro Malaspina is finally recognized as one of the greatest explorers of all time. His story is a chilling, powerful reminder that the greatest threat to knowledge is not a storm at sea, but the paranoia of insecure men. He was a hero whose success was so profound that his own government chose to bury him rather than listen to the truth.